Not quite sure what happened there, guys. We just got locked off.
Can you see me? Sorry.
I can't see you just yet. I don't know what happened. We just got locked off.
Oh, so you can't see me just yet?
I can't see you now. Just wait. I think we're just waiting for you to connect properly.
Okay.
It's crazy. Everything seems to have been crashing. Skype crashed today. Zoom the other day. Do you know what I mean? Now IG.
Oh, so you still can't see me just yet?
I can see you.
Okay, good.
Okay. Hopefully no more technical difficulties.
Sorry,
guys.
What I was just going to say, though, was just about the importance of self-care during this time. And I think sometimes we're caught in the middle of wanting to witness and be part and keep ourselves up to date with what's going on, because that's important. But we also have to think about the impact it has on us emotionally. There's only so much distress and trauma and raw pain we can take at any one time. So I think it's about giving ourselves permission to dial back and sometimes switch off before we can then re-engage in a safe way. And so Come Dine With Me may have been what you needed, because you just needed a bit of space, because what's going on is very intense. It's relentless and it's very pervasive. It's everywhere we look at the moment.
Yes, indeed. And I think a lot of people have done that, because I've noticed this time around, I'm not saying that people don't care. I think people are a lot more trauma informed and trauma aware, at least, whereby the networking of trauma, as I like to put it. I haven't seen the video circle around as much as previously, because it's not people. I think people are not appreciating that, especially if they're not giving any warning, for example.
And I think the thing is that I think in the beginning it was important to maybe see, because it really brought home a reality that had been denied to Black people sometimes, in terms of the brutality and the violence. But then I think when it gets to a point where it's feeling very gratuitous, or it's actually very, very triggering, you need to be thinking about, actually, these are real life people who are in the videos. And there's a sense of it becoming desensitized, or people not really appreciating the severity because they're just seeing a video after video. So it's really about getting in contact with the actual humanity of what's happening. And we don't need to keep seeing all the videos to know that there's violence and death and grief out there. But we do need to get in contact with actually making a change and doing things differently.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, because I can tell you straight, 12 years a slave, 12 years could pass and I still haven't watched that film. I have no interest in watching that level of pain. I get it. I've understood. I've read about it. I've watched the film already about it. Why do we need to see it again? And then again, in terms of when the media was standing with Black Lives Matter, for example, Netflix, the content that they put up was very much around Black pain, and I thought, no, this is too much. This is not for me. This is not for me.
We need a balance. We need to have a celebration of the Black community, of Black culture, of Black achievements, but we do need to also acknowledge the pain, because it is part of the history. Yes. I think the difficulty is, if you have a people that are traumatized, what we're seeing at the moment is we don't quite understand where the trauma is coming from. And so if you think about the transgenerational element or the historical element, that's really important. But Black people are more than their pain. But at the moment, it's a very, very real part of the reality that we're facing at the moment, which is painful, raw, and brutal.
Yes, indeed. So, you know what? There's stuff in terms of around my research, reading, listening, whatever. There's stuff around trying to understand what a microaggression is. What is a microaggression?
Well, I think the thing is that these are things that happen every day that really kind of lead us to really think about what's going on. So really like the subtle, intentional, but sometimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias or some sort of racist experience towards Black people or other marginalized groups. And so these are the little things like, where are you from? Where are you from? Or you speak well for a Black person, or, how did you get into this job? We don't see people like you around. They're the little things that kind of erode at one, and they kind of like have a very, very corrosive impact. They're very subtle, but they're kind of covert experiences of racism that we see every day and we experience every day.
And I think it's something that we've probably been quite desensitized to as well. Now, I like a story. Story time, guys. So going back about, I think it's 2012, I went for a job interview in rural Herefordshire as deputy manager of a children's home. So I get there, and I was interviewed by two white ladies, and it was great. I smashed the interview, got the job. But the point was I want to make was that in the interview, one of the ladies said, "Oh, it'd be really good, to have another coloured person working in this region." And I let that one slip. And I got back to my car, the 1.5 hour drive back home. I was cussing myself about that. And it wasn't until today, actually, well, yesterday, where I realized, how did I let that one slip? And I realized what the issue is about as a black man, right? And we're working in different spaces, yeah, in white spaces especially. We are very conscious about our masculinity. Right, so hi, you know what I mean. We bring down our masculinity quite some. So that one just went completely over my head. So it just, I just didn't know how to react to it at the time. I says, watch when I see her next time. I'm gonna tell her, yeah. And I did, and it was like it fell on deaf ears. It fell on deaf ears. Do you know what I mean? But for me, it was something that. I don't know if it was racism. I don't know if it's a bias. I don't know. What would you describe that as?
Well, I think it's complicated because I think the thing with the microaggressions is that sometimes they're not intentional. So something about actually welcoming you into a space to actually acknowledge that actually there's a deficit of Black and ethnic minority people in this area, but the way it came out was very, very unhelpful maybe. And then you're sort of sitting there with the issue around power. You are interviewing for a job. So you're also thinking how much of how do I raise this? How do I think about it? Because you're aware of the power difference, but you're also aware of the fact that you're bringing a very unique experience to the space. Yes. That is, you're having to navigate and think carefully about it. So these are like the complexities of the everyday sort of microaggressions or the white spaces that Black people have to navigate on a daily basis. And you're really having to think about lots of different things at any one time. And sometimes our own experiences get put to one side because we also have to survive and hopefully thrive. And there's always that tension between the two.
Yeah, it's that conflict, isn't it? It's that internal conflict sometimes that takes place. So in terms of like macroaggressions, how might I recognize a macroaggression?
Well, I think with a macroaggression, they're kind of like the bigger, the larger, the more overt sort of insults or comments or derogatory or negative things you might hear. And they're the things that make you think, oh, okay, that does feel very racist. Whereas a micro seems to be the more subtle ones. They're not always intended to demean, but they do have that impact of actually kind of like highlighting a sense of inferiority with superiority. So they're very subtly different, but they are different, yeah. Okay.
So this is pretty much sums up the every day pretty much of the Black experience, really, of macro and micro racial aggressions, really. So there's another theme that kept popping up as well. What is empathy fatigue? Yeah.
So this is something that's coming up more and more now, because I think, like you mentioned before, there's a sense that we can only take so much distress at any one time. And part of being human and connecting with another person is experiencing empathy, is having empathy and having a real understanding of what's it like to be in that person's shoes. And the difficulty is when you're seeing racial trauma or racial violence or anything that might be very racially based or stressful, you're also aware that you're living your own experience. And so the reality is that it can feel very, very fatiguing because there's no respite. So the empathy fatigue is that you can only have so much empathy at any one time. And it's not because you don't want to, but it's also about you to protect yourself. Otherwise, you will get burnt out, essentially.
That makes sense. Okay. And just thinking about, this, I was going to ask this question about what is the role of anti-Blackness in racial trauma?
Yeah. And I think that's a really important question, because I think the idea about racial trauma is about very much looking about the traumatic experience of racist encounters, which are meant to like demean, humiliate, threaten, or even like threatens one's life. And I think the thing about anti-Blackness is a specificity. Black people experience a particular type of racist encounter because there's something about the way Black people look. You can easily identify them. There's a real sense that there's something specific in that racist encounter that other minority groups may not actually experience. And I think it's really important because we're in danger of making racism very, very broad and then everybody's affected, but we're not really getting to the core of the issue, which is something about the Black experience, where there's a sense of actually this relates to a sense of inferiority and difference and other, yes, which is very much really part of the racist encounter. So the anti-Blackness is really important in actually helping people to really get in contact with what a racist encounter may feel like or look like for a Black person, because it is really about that sense of inferiority, negativity, and the derogatory nature that comes with that.
Okay, I was going to ask, have you got any like examples of that you can perhaps share? Yeah.
In terms of
the role of anti-Blackness in racial trauma.
I think, like I said, it's really about actually specifying about the Black person. So it might be something to think about. Black people's hair. It's very unique to the people. And so something about actually something to do with that would be very specific, because that is the Black experience of having like afro hair, curly hair. You might be wearing braids or have locks or things like that. So that would be very specific to the Black experience. So if you talk about racism, the racist encounter, people may not actually fully understand what it means. But with the anti-Blackness linking to, for example, the hair, you get a real sense that this is a unique experience to a Black encounter that separates them from other types of racist encounters.
Yes, okay, that really helps. Thank you. So it's 2020. I remember beginning of the year, end of last year, everybody was talking about 2020 is my year. People say that every year, don't they? But yeah, 2020 vision. I don't think people really quite realize what this 2020 vision was going to bring in terms of the experiences that we've brought. And yes, people are waking up, but I don't know who's drifting back asleep, and people are becoming woke, and people are starting to find a voice. People are starting to become a bit more active. And I think all of that kind of falls on the back of being in the house and being at home. So for some people who have been at home, homeschooling, furloughed, and they're now maybe returning back to working now as lockdown measures start to ease. I would like to think about some of the difficulties people might be facing by going back into those white spaces.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the difficulties is nothing is as it was. I mean, 2020 has really shaken any frame of reference we had in terms of any sense of normality. So the real sense that your mental map of what was no longer is fit for purpose, because the landscape has changed so much. True. But I think what also Black people are sitting with is the experience of having their own experiences recognized and talked about so publicly. Yeah. And they're having to now start to think about actually, what was my experience in this space before? Like you do, and think about actually, what are the encounters I've had? Were they actually racist? How do I feel? How do I feel about maybe my colleagues now? Who was an ally? Who was maybe a performative ally? Who kept quiet? So you're really having to really start to reassess what your space looks like, how safe it is, what your relationships are like, because what's been done can't be undone. It can't be forgotten. It can't be unseen. Yeah. And so it's about really trying to think about what it means to you and how it affects your sense of self, but also the connections and the safety and the experience you have in white spaces when we've had such real experiences at home, when we've been under COVID lockdown.
Thank you. Now, racial trauma and how it kind of plays out differently between Black men and Black women. What kind of your thoughts around that?
I think that's an interesting one, because I think a lot of the encounters around racism do link into the inferiority, negativity, but also violence and sexualization. So I think with Black men, Black men are being socialized to, be strong, not really show their feelings, manage things by themselves. And so if they're getting experience of racism or getting attacked or something like that, they have to deal with it themselves. So I think they're more likely to take things on and not tell anyone, but it will leak out in different ways. It might affect their sense of self-esteem, how they relate to other people, whether they might try to self-medicate through drugs or alcohol, how they feel about their work. Do they kind of overcompensate and throw themselves into it, or they kind of walk away from it and take a bit of distance? So I think it will look different, but there's very much similarities. I think with women, we're more likely to talk about things and actually have our experience shared, and they may actually get a little bit more support, because there is a sense of people talk, people connect, and actually you get a sense that you're not alone. But I think with racism, what's really core at it is a feeling of loneliness. The fact that actually this experience is awful. You're on your own. You don't have anyone to connect with. So men will find it difficult and women will find it difficult in different ways. But I think the interesting thing when you think about the different experiences men and women have is actually what happens when they come together. So if you've got a couple who are experiencing racial discrimination or race-based stress in the external world, how does it affect the couple relationship? Because that is a huge thing, which I don't think we talk enough about how does racism and racial trauma affect the couple relationship in terms of safety, security, support, but also feelings of disconnect, anger, sadness, confusion. It's a very, very complicated experience. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but it feels quite complicated.
Absolutely, I've got a couple of thoughts about it actually. So when I shared the video with my missus, I says, look, if you see the video and it starts like this, and you see the footnote picture, I says, don't watch it, yeah, because this is what's happened, and she was like, oh my God, I says, no, I'm not talking about, I can't talk about that right now. And that was I went downstairs. I says, no, I can't. I really can't take that on right now, really. And you know, compared to and for me that really fits in with what you were saying. And then when I did a live with Craig Pinkney around you know, the price of freedom is death, I had a lovely message from a sister who told me about how she's in a mixed relationship with a black man, and that it was that live video, that video that allowed them to actually open up the dialogue to actually discuss this, because they were unable to communicate that, and he was just holding it as sometimes men do. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's pretty much my thoughts around that. It's quite complex. It's quite complex, and I think it's one of these ones where we have to kind of, you know, take care of each other in this and be quite considerate.
Exactly, but also curious, because there's something, you know, some topics feel very dangerous to go there, but actually part of what self-care involves is reciprocity. So being curious, asking people, you know, how are you? But when they say fine, say, what does that mean? Because we're often good at saying things that don't communicate much. And actually people often ask questions, but they don't really want to hear the answer. You know, actually sit and listen to someone when they're saying, you know, pick up on the non-verbal behaviors. Yeah. If you haven't heard from one of your friends for a while, check in and just say, hey, how, you know, what's going on? How are you doing? I've been thinking about you. And that's, you know, important to know that you're in someone's mind, because I think when you're experiencing racism or experiencing empathy fatigue, or just overwhelmed by the amount of distress and violence on the television and social media, you can feel very alone and very disconnected, but you may not have the energy to actually actively connect, but you want to know that you're held in someone's mind. So I think one of my biggest words for anybody I work with or anyone I talk to is curiosity, because that, you know, communicates care. And I think that's really, really key. Communicate, curiosity and care.
Wow, that's brilliant. What was it? My next question was, for many people as part of their journey, they've gone, they've been on a journey. For many people have been on a journey over the last how many months. There's the, you know, the Black Renaissance, you know what I mean, the Black History Renaissance and the knowledge of self. And people have been, these things have been discussed more openly, in many different ways, and there's so many different sources of information, which is great. And these conversations are happening on Zooms and social media, and they're happening on podcasts, and it's such a wealth of information. And you know, you can have ebooks and listen to it. It's brilliant, you know what I mean? So my thing is you know, part of their journey of decolonizing their the Black identity, as I call it, about what knowledge that they have found. So basically the knowledge that they've found out around Black Cane and Black history, right, and the impact that it's actually had on people's mental health. So I think we can all probably think about that person who may be suffering from mental health issues, right? And we're looking at them and we're thinking, you know why? Because they read too much book, and they're on too much bond down Babylon, and they're so pro-Black that it's actually damaged them. And that's the sort of narrative that I've sort of heard people saying. So, what are your thoughts around the impact on people's mental health, right, by going on this journey of looking at self and identity, Black identity?
The impact is vast and it varies for different people. I think one of the things we need to think about is the context. Part of journeys of self-discovery, people are ready and willing and they embark upon it almost voluntarily. Yeah. There's something about this journey of self-discovery that people are going through where it's been thrust upon them because they're confronted by these things in such a brutal, abrupt, a way that can't actually be denied. Yeah. And so then you also got to think about whether people are ready to actually discover as much, because it is painful. Yeah. But it's about actually understanding where you're from. But actually learning where you're from also means letting go of what you know. And that can be really painful. So I think somehow there's something about pain and loss and mourning, but also excitement and embracing things. But it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of mental work. You're having to constantly challenge assumptions or think about things. The world is not as you know it. Every time you read a book, listen to a podcast, you start looking at the world differently. And one thing that very much characterizes 2020 is constant change. We're in what we call a VUCA world, which is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And that takes a lot of energy just to keep in mind. So people will feel sad. They will feel anxious. What does this mean for me? I have to actually maybe reassess and reevaluate some of my friendships, my relationships, but also who I am, what I've done to actually, support the anti-racism stance, but maybe what have I done unwittingly to support a racist stance? How have I been involved in white supremacy because of what I've internalized? So these are all really difficult questions we have to ask ourselves. And when you're doing it by yourself, it can feel really, really intense and really lonely. And that's why I think safe spaces that you can talk with others, therapy is really important, because it's about making sense with someone and giving yourself distance and space to really look at it. And I think the thing is that a lot of people probably try to do too much all at once, become overwhelmed by it, and essentially either very fatigued or burnt out. Yeah. But this is a journey, and we never stop learning about who we are until we leave this earth. So it's about holding in mind that you don't have to do all the work now. Yes. Every little helps, but it's really about doing it at a pace that's safe enough for you. And if it's too fast, protecting yourself, self-care. And so part of what I think the difficulty is as well is that we don't quite know how to look after ourselves. We talk about self-care, but when people think about it, I think people think about hour-long walks or a bubble bath, as opposed to the little things we need to do on a daily basis to look after ourselves, to really ensure that we're resilient. And if we think about resilience, it's not just the ability to cope with adversity, it's the ability to adapt. And that is what self-discovery is. You're learning to adapt to a new world, a new normal, a new way of seeing things based on information that you're learning.
Wow. And you know what, I'm just thinking, because I've been doing some reading around self-care. And one of the things that came up about self-care is that self-care is something that's usually role modeled. And it's sometimes it's usually something that's usually passed down by family. But in terms of the way, culturally, the way we are, self-care is seen as sometimes selfish. Yeah. Self-care is not looked upon favorably, Because
it's seen as self-indulgence.
Yes.
And I think that's the difficulty, as opposed to this is what I need to do to ensure that I am here in the best possible place to help myself, my family, and my community. And so when we think about self-care, it's little things like diet, it's like sleep, but it's also about how do you have race-based conversations? Because there's something about, with everything that's gone on in 2020, everybody's talking and everybody wants to know about the Black experience. But for Black people, it's your experience. You have a choice about when you want to share it, if you want to share it. It's about how you put these boundaries around these parts of your life to actually support you, to give you a sense of agency and control. They're the self-care things. When you think about nutrition and diet, how do you connect with people? How do you nourish yourself spiritually? What are the things that you neglect or you push to one side? That is what self-care is about. It's not the hour-long bubble bath, although it can be, but it's the little things we do on a daily basis that really help ensure that resilience. And I think a huge part of self-care is communication. Again, it's about communicating, connecting, and being curious.
That's a lot to take in. And you know, it's something that a lot of us are having to learn, is this self-care stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So
And
now,
not feel guilty about. That's the
yeah,
thing. I think when you think about self-care, it's like you said, selfishness, or it feels wrong to prioritize yourself, you know. But actually, if you think about, you can't pour from an empty vessel. Eleanor Brown said that lovely. You know, if you're
I
on a
love that.
plane and something happens, you are told to put your oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you. So it's about how we reframe these things in our mind, where they aren't so negative, so critical, so damning, but actually nurturing and empowering, and actually quite liberating. Because actually to look after yourself is a pleasure, because then you can actually help to look after other people, and you're modeling something. You're modeling something which is breaking the transgenerational, if you like, pattern of sacrifice, which means you basically survive rather than thrive.
Sister, I knew. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, you know, the other question I was going to ask was, what can we do to help ourselves through racial trauma?
The first thing I think is to let yourself feel, because I think feelings tell us something, and they are telling us it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. And I think there's been a lot of things, if we think about also things like racial gaslighting, where we're made to doubt our feelings. And actually, feelings are important because they communicate something. Anger communicates pain. Anxiety communicates fear. A sense, you know, our sense of security has been shifted. How the world looks has been shifted. So I think the first thing is to validate your emotions and be compassionate and to let yourself feel. I think the other thing is also then to think about, actually, how do I look after myself? So also think about the levels of self-care. What do you do? What do you need to do? And part of it is also thinking about, when you get stressed or feel anxious or feel low, what does it look like for you? So for some people, they may be very much in their minds. They may be real thinkers and ruminate. Other people may feel it in their body. Other people may find it in other ways. And I think if you understand what your stress response looks like, you can then make sure you engage in self-care activities that really support yourselves. I think another thing would be communication, talking to people around you, talking to friends or family, or even a therapist, someone like me, but also writing. Writing is an expressive art form, and there's something really therapeutic and cathartic about writing about your experiences, which you can then share with others if you want to, or don't, it doesn't matter. But there's something about actually seeing the words on the paper make something real. It's no longer in your mind, and that can be really helpful in letting something go. I would say another thing is really about compassion, practicing self-compassion and forgiveness. You know, you forgive yourself for feeling some of the things you do, being compassionate towards yourself, recognizing what you've been through. That's going to be key. And I think the other thing about healing through racial trauma is actually learning about your past. You know, learning where you've come from is really important, to know who you are and where you want to go. And that can really help you feel connected to the Black community, because part of being traumatized is that you feel very out of control, you feel very disconnected, you feel very, very, you know, strong emotions, and you can feel very, very alone. And it's really about connecting safely in a way that's at your own pace, but it's about nurturing and empowering and healing, which is about self-care. There's lots of things we can do.
Yeah. So, you mentioned about racial gaslighting. It was something that was mentioned about a month or a couple of months ago around some situations that was going on in London. Can you explain a bit more about that racial gaslighting? Sorry.
Well, if you like, it's like a form of psychological manipulation, which makes Black people or someone actually question their experience. And so I think this often we're seeing when someone goes, "I didn't mean it that way," or "You've taken this the wrong way," or, you know, that's not exactly what I was trying to say. And I suppose the difficulty is that that person, the Black person's experience, becomes invalidated. They start to question, "Oh, should I have felt that way? Have I overreacted? What does this mean?" And so then their experiences get denied. And I suppose a hallmark of racism is about an experience or a reality is denied. And so therefore it becomes very hard to challenge things because someone didn't mean it. Yeah. You cannot mean it and it still happen, and you can still work with it, but the two don't necessarily mean they exclude each other or cancel out each other. So that's really important to think about. Your experience is your experience, and you feel it for a reason, and that is enough. Feelings can't be challenged. They are what you feel. Thoughts may be, but feelings cannot be challenged. And I think that's really important.
Wow. Do you know what? Yeah, because that's just, you know, a lot to think about. And I want to kind of tell everybody from now that we're very fortunate to have Dr. Babb next week also for another session. I thought you might like that. Which is about a topic that that's really quite close to my heart, and it's transgenerational trauma and the impact on attachment. So, and it's kind of a difficult, and it's kind of a difficult one because the two subjects kind of interlink, don't they? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm quite conscious about us not spilling over into that session. But listen, if anybody's got any questions at this stage, are you all right with taking some questions?
Most definitely, most definitely.
Because this is massive. And perhaps in the meantime, you could tell us about some of the work that you've been doing around this anti-racism work.
So one of the things I've been doing is a series of talk called The Black Experience, because a big part of what I think is going on is about actually how do we make sense of being Black? And I think one of the things that 2020 and especially the murder of George Floyd really brought into awareness of what it means to be Black. We know, but there's something about that just really kind of like brought it up and you think, wow. So my series of talks, The Black Experiences, like talks over 5 weeks, which look at Black identity, race and racial trauma, racism, anti-racism and self-care, and then the reflective space to really think about what does this mean? What do I want to continue doing? What do I want to let go of? And what do I want to start? And I think the main thing around a lot of traumatic experiences is lack of choice. And what I'm trying to do is give people the tools to actually have choice to make different decisions or the same decisions, but at least they can own it differently. So that's one thing I've been doing. I also co-run an anti-racist book club where myself and another psychologist think about books. We use books as a way of actually bringing something into the space and exploring some of the issues to do with racism, power, white supremacy, institutional racism within psychology, but also other organizations. And I think really actively just bringing it into my work. One of the things about, I think, racism and racial trauma is that it's often not even brought in. You know, some of the clients I've worked with over my career, you know, race never came up. And it's like, how is this? Because I think it just was too much. And so it is about actively asking the questions, being curious, asking about people, you know, have you had an experience of racism? How has this affected you? What is your experience? How do you feel? And actually letting it come up, because one of the hallmarks of anti-racism is actually making the reality known. And the paradox of change is you cannot begin to change anything unless you face reality as it is. And so that's the sort of things I've been doing, trying to help raise awareness, but help people feel more confident in their knowledge, but also their ability to look after themselves and the people around them.
Yeah. One of my sisters, Kush Data, just put a poster out. Can we have some practical responses around declining talking about race at work? Because it's quite hard. I know I mentioned in the previous slide about one of my colleagues who was asked to speak about race and perhaps do a bit of training, and she's like, no. And I think there was another incident, another classic incident watching Good Morning Britain. I don't know why I watched that show, you know, but it was Dizzy Rascal, when he got into a little confrontation with Pierce, and he was talking about, am I the spokesperson for Black people, quite rightly. Do you know what I mean? So what sort of advice can you give around that? Some, like, you know, good responses perhaps?
Well, I think the first thing is to remember, or to hold in mind, that this is what we call racial outsourcing. And in a way, it's reenacting some of the oppressive experiences that Black people experience, where to be a champion of something actually involves a labour, a cost, because these are things you have to do in addition to your work. Your white counterparts won't know, so you have to do this. But the organisation benefits from your knowledge, which you've gained on your own time, so to speak. And there's not actually any reward or recognition. So I think the first thing is about thinking about, do you want to get involved or not? I think the other thing is about actually, for example, if they're having a conversation and you're being invited, you might just want to say, you know, I can see that it's really important. I'm glad that we're having this conversation, but right now I don't feel that I'm able to contribute to this. Can we pick it up another time? Or you might even start to actually look at the dynamics and just start to wonder, I wonder why everyone's looking to me as the Black person to provide an answer. Because I think part of what you can do is start to facilitate rather than provide the content. And if you help people facilitate a space, you help people think. And I think the difficulty of anti-racism work is that it takes effort, and people by nature will always find the path of least resistance, which is to ask someone for the answer. And what we're trying to do is help change people's ways of thinking. So it's about having your own boundaries, knowing where you feel comfortable, thinking about actually it's important because you want to recognize the effort, but right now I can't, it's just too painful. Or can we talk about it in a meeting, and diarize something. So I think the declining you have every right to is also about having the confidence that if you are perceived as an angry person, or, you know, someone who's not being, you know, conforming or very helpful, then that can be thought about. But you also have to think about this, the space that you have to survive in and you have to live in and you have to be part of, and you're allowed to have boundaries and you're allowed to say no. And if that's problematic, then let's have that discussion about why it's problematic, because you wouldn't necessarily have the same response maybe to someone talking about homophobia or sexism or something like that. There's something very unique about the Black experience, where there's a sense of entitlement to have a conversation now when I want. And actually it's thinking about it. There's two people or more in an actual interaction. Let's think about that together.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that's really helpful. Thank you. We've got another question. How can we be part of your book club? Is that something that's open?
Well, at the moment we're still expanding. So at the moment it's for psychologists, but we're thinking about expanding it out to other people as well. So keep an eye on my profile or Instagram or Twitter, and we'll have more information about that. But we're just getting started in terms of thinking about the people that work with Black people. They need to be in an anti-racist space to do the work. So that's where we thought we'll start. But it's actually a really helpful way of having conversations in a safe way, because you have that space, the book, to think about things. And it's not always about bringing the raw emotion or the lived experience, but you can think about things. But yeah, keep an eye on my profile and I'll keep you up to date.
So if you're not already, follow at Dr Roberta Babb on Instagram, Twitter. So just do it. It's worth it, honestly. What else can I see? Yeah. Listen, is there anything else you'd like to add? I'm just thinking.
I think I would say that, you know, I think the thing about racial trauma is when people are starting to heal from trauma, usually they're through the traumatic experience. And we're in a really unique situation where we're still in the traumatic experience. And I think that's where we think about the empathy fatigue, but this is where we think about how do we look after ourselves, because in trying to heal, you can sometimes be opening old wounds, which may need to be reviewed and explored, but maybe the time might not be now, given the context. So I think it's really important to remember that we're still in something. And I think as Black people, your past is still very much part of your present. You hope it's not going to be part of your future, but you have to be careful in terms of what you do, how you get involved with things. And thinking and stepping back are still actions. Looking after yourself is still an action. You know, we haven't always got to be at the forefront, and it's about giving space to others, but also questioning the absences and the silences. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. So I think it is about giving yourself permission to think differently about how you engage in the fight, how you think about your own journey of self-discovery, how you look after yourself, and how you communicate to the other people around you. And I think these are sorts of things I really would like people to take away with them, because just because it is doesn't mean it has to be.
Wow. So tell me something. Some of your workshops or training and stuff, is that something that we can find out more information about by being on following you on the social media?
Yep, most definitely. Yep, because I think there's something about making the information accessible to all, because the more information you know, the more informed you are, the different types of conversations you can have. And it then minimizes instances of racial gaslighting, for example, because you may have facts to back something up, or you may feel actually quite empowered to actually challenge something where before you felt quite fatigued. So I think, yes, but there's also lots of other Black people, Black psychologists doing lots of other great work. And I think the great thing is that even if you go on Eventbrite, there's so many things. And what I think coronavirus has done really helpfully, and I really believe in the idea that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, is actually it's opened up the wealth of information and the accessibility of information. So, you know, you can go on Eventbrite, for example, and you can join webinars or seminars in America, in Africa, wherever. We're no longer limited by geography. And I think it's those little mindsets which help us actually engage with this differently and look at ourselves and our journey of self-discovery differently. So it is about just taking a bit of time to think what's out there and trying it. A lot of things are free. A lot of you know, and even going to a seminar, that is self-care. And I think it's really important to think about self-care is an investment in you. It's not a cost. Learning about something is an investment. It's not a cost. And when you reframe things, that's when you can, again, start to feel more motivated, engaged, because actually you're seeing the benefits. It's not always take, which can be a real hallmark of burnout.
Wow. So we've got a question from Afro Thought. What are your thoughts about on racial battle fatigue?
I think it's real. And I think it's like some of the things we've been talking about earlier, that there is, I think before, especially what's happened this year, there was a sense that there's a one way to engage with this. And you think about protests happen when people feel very, very desperate, very, very, you know, trapped, that they have no other alternative. But we're finding different ways to think about things and engage. But racial battle fatigue is real. You know, you're thinking about not only the wider systemic issues, the societal issues, but a personal issue. And I think that really links into when people have race-based discussions, often people are talking on two different levels. So a Black person is not just talking about their individual experience, they're thinking about their transgenerational experience, the collective experience, the community, the societal, and the person or the people they might be talking to are looking at them as an individual. And so I think part of it is thinking about you're in a battle, you're having to think about what do I fight? How do I engage? Because actually, if you're not here, you can't be part of the fight. And so it is a difficult thing. And it is about giving yourself permission to sometimes take a step back, to get over our fear of missing out and to be okay with not knowing, but also then knowing that I can know if I need to, but have given yourself permission to take 5 when you need it, because otherwise the cost is too great.
It is too great. Dr. Babb, you know what? It's been wonderful having you on. I'm very, very grateful. I think we are very, very, very grateful. And we're looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday, where we're joined by this hot topic. I swear, I can't wait for this one. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. It's intense.
Honestly. So, listen, look after yourself. Yeah. Everybody take care of yourselves, because like I said, it's a very challenging time. And, you know, I think many of us have started to adopt different approaches of dealing with this trauma. And, you know, it seems to be a lot more productive this time round, if I want to say. And you know what? You have explained it ever so eloquently in a way that just makes sense. And, you know, in terms of understanding racial trauma, there is a real difference from racial trauma to other types of trauma, in the fact that it still continues, and it's not just your personal trauma, it's the trauma of others, and it's a collective trauma, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're seeing it on a day-to-day basis, which is really, really painful and really, really distressing.
Yeah.
But there's hope, because we're here. We're doing something different. We're talking. So again, it's about how we balance and really celebrate the Black community, Black achievement, and Black culture in a way that is empowering and actually gives us a sense of agency and liberation. But there's hope.
There is hope. Oh, bless you. Listen, sis, take care, and much appreciated.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Indeed, and I'll see you next week.
I look forward to it. And I'll see everyone next week as well.
All right then. Take care, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.